Hi, I'm Heather Sims, a Dallas area real estate broker, and today we're talking about a question that I hear all the time from both buyers and sellers. Is the Dallas housing market crashing? And honestly, if you've spent more than 5 minutes on social media lately, you might really think the answer is yes. Every time a house has a price reduction, somebody says the market is crashing. Every time inventory goes up, somebody says the market is crashing. Every time interest rates move, somebody says the market is crashing. And if you're a buyer or seller trying to make an important decision, all of that noise can get really confusing really quickly. So today I want to talk about what's really happening in the Dallas area real estate market, what's changed, what hasn't changed, and whether the word crash is really the right word for what we're seeing. Let's start with the biggest misconception out there right now. A market slowdown and a market crash are not the same thing. A crash typically means prices falling dramatically over a relatively short period of time. Think back to 2008. That's what most people think of when they hear the word crash. Homes sitting vacant, foreclosures everywhere, massive declines in values. That is not what I'm seeing in the Dallas area market today. Has the market changed? Absolutely. Is it harder to sell a home today than it was in 2021 or 2022? 100%. But those are two very different conversations than the crash conversation. What we're seeing right now is much more of a normalization than a crash. For several years, sellers had all the leverage. Homes were getting multiple offers. Buyers were waiving contingencies. Some buyers were offering tens of thousands of dollars over asking price and over appraisal. And honestly, that wasn't normal either. A lot of people became accustomed to that environment and started thinking that that's just how real estate worked. It wasn't. It was an unusually aggressive seller's market that honestly was not healthy. Today's market looks much more balanced, and because it feels different than what we experienced a few years ago, some people assume that that means something terrible. But let's talk about what I'm actually seeing sort of on the ground or in the trenches, right? Inventory is higher, which means buyers have a lot more choices. Days on market are longer, which means sellers have to be more patient. Price reductions are much more common, which means pricing correctly matters more than ever. And negotiations are happening again. Honestly, as a realtor, I'm kind of excited that negotiations have made a comeback. For a while there, it felt like buyers couldn't negotiate anything. Today, we're seeing conversations about repairs again. We're seeing some closing costs for buyers. We're seeing interest rate buy downs, and we're seeing some terms that are possible to negotiate that were impossible before during the frenzy. Before sellers panic, let me say this. Homes are still selling. Good homes that are priced well are still selling. They just sit for a little while. And homes that are marketed correctly are still selling too. The difference is that buyers have a lot more options. When buyers have options, they're more selective. That means pricing, presentation, condition, marketing all matter much more than they did a few years ago. I often tell sellers that today's market is simply less forgiving, right? Back in 2021, you could get away with things that are much harder to get away with today. You could overprice. You could have some deferred maintenance. You could have poor presentation or weak photography. Those things tend to get exposed much faster in today's market because buyers have alternatives. Let's talk about buyers for a minute. Buyers often hear market slowdown and assume they should be waiting. The challenge with that strategy is nobody knows what the market is going to do next. And I'll tell you that. Nobody. Not me, not your lender, not the economist on TV, not the guy on Facebook who posts predictions every day, right? Everybody's crystal ball is broken. If there's one thing I've learned in real estate, it's that making predictions for the future is a very dangerous game. People have been predicting housing crashes for years. Some have been predicting them almost continuously since 2020. And yet, here we are. We are not in a crash. What buyers should really be asking is not, will prices go down or will rates go down? What they should be asking is, does buying make sense for me right now? Because your personal situation matters much more than any headline out there. How long would you stay in your home if you bought one today? How stable is your job? How comfortable is the monthly payment for you? How much have you saved? Those questions are often much more important than trying to perfectly time the market, which is basically impossible. Because the reality is that most people don't build wealth in real estate by perfectly timing the market. They build wealth by buying a home they can comfortably afford and holding it for several years. Now let's talk about sellers again real quick. If you're thinking about selling, I don't think the takeaway about today's market should be fear. I think the takeaway should be strategy. The homes that are struggling right now are usually struggling for a reason. They are overpriced, they're not presented well, they don't show well, they're not being marketed effectively. They're competing, but against better options. But the solution isn't sort of panic. The solution is understanding the market that you're in. One of the conversations I have most often with sellers is this. Your home doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be competitive. It does have to show well. And if it's not updated, we better price it that way for sure. Because buyers are comparing your home to every other home they can see online. Like I've said several times now, there are a lot more choices available today for buyers than there were a few years ago. And here's something I think is really important. Dallas is not one giant housing market, right? Heath is very different than Rockwall. Rockwall is very different than Rowlett. Rowlett is very different than Garland. Garland is different than Richardson. Let's keep going. Richardson's different than Plano. Plano's different than Frisco. You get the idea, right? Price points are different. Neighborhoods are different. School districts are different. Even two neighborhoods a mile apart can experience very different levels of demand. Even two different elementary schools within the same school district can experience very different levels of demand. That's why broad national headlines can sometimes be really misleading. They don't always reflect what's happening in your market. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're trying to figure out whether it's a good time to buy or sell. They're listening to national news when what they really need is local information, or even what I would call hyper-localized information. So, is the Dallas housing market crashing? In my opinion, no, it is not. It's changing, it's normalizing, it's becoming more balanced. It may be becoming a buyer market. I really do think that's healthier than what we experienced a few years ago. Buyers should have options. Sellers should have competition. Negotiations should be able to be made. Strategy matters. So at the end of the day, whether you're buying or selling, I would not make a major real estate decision based solely on scary headlines, right? I'd make it based on your goals, your finances, your timeline, and what's actually happening in your local market. And if you're wondering what the market looks like in your specific neighborhood and you're in the Dallas area, I would be happy to help. And that's all I have for you today. I would love to see you next week on another edition of All Things Real Estate. Thank you for watching today, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.